I appreciate that, Justin. Great to be here. I'm also we have a VIP in the audience. I just want to introduce her as well. My wife, Sherry Dixon's here. After 10 years in the TBLC, I wanted her to know what we do up here. And I was like, you ought to come. And so she's here. This is good stuff. So this is going to be a lot of fun, I think. And I mean, obviously the headlines, all the dystopia, the exaggerations. We're not going to delve into that so much. We're going to focus on really a handful of things. One of them is, candidly, the opportunity in front of us, the businesses. It is the Texas Business Leadership Council. We have a lot of CEOs here. That's probably the biggest thing is like, what does the competitive landscape look like? And what do you do potentially if you don't use this stuff or you be left behind? So that's the first thing. The second thing is workforce. What are we going to do to get the more data scientists, more people that are savvy on machine learning, on neural networks? How do we do that? How do we grow these people? And just as an aside, we worked on the cybersecurity bill in 2017, and we were both kind of dabbling in AI, and now we're in it full time. So there's a lot of people that look like us here. The third thing is the less fun side or the dark side, which is the dystopia or kind of the risk associated with AI. So much of the discussion, public discussion, is focused on that right now. We'll touch on it, but I promised the organizers we weren't going to go too deep in the dark side. So let me introduce our speakers and we'll get going. I'm going to go from the far side to the end. That may be a breach of protocol. I apologize. But let me first introduce Chris Lucy, who's also a TBLC member. He's a technologist, software and hardware guy, I'd like to throw out there. Been in the AI space for almost a decade plus, which means that...
A little under.
Less?
Yeah, about 8 years.
Well, if you use AI, it's 10.
Oh.
No, just joking.
It's all about the data. You can't do that.
He's CEO of Smart Sort Technologies. He's so an expert in the whole area of smart climate solutions and that whole realm, if you're familiar with that. Worked with NATO, NASA, worked a lot with multinationals and big companies in this space. So Chris will bring that perspective. Chris, welcome. All right. You can clap. It's okay. To Chris's right and your left, we have, I think I got that right, Catherine McAden, also TBLC member, and representing Google's external policy efforts in South Central U.S. Google's that small startup that's in the incubator, small. And what she has weighed in on is obviously all the legislation at the state level and other places that is affecting Google and tech firms. She has a storied history in the ledge world and knows everybody in Austin. And that was not AI. I want to throw that out there. And she's going to add the big company view and also kind of the legislative side from the other side. On the receiving end, I guess, of potential. Representative Giovanni Capriglione is serving his sixth term in the Texas House, representing House District 98. He's chairman of the House Committee on Pensions, Investment, and Financial Services. Perhaps most importantly, in my world, the chairman of the Innovation and Tech Caucus, and the co-chairman of the Texas Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council. As I mentioned, we worked on tech bills. I think it's safe to say you're the tech guy in the House and perhaps Senate, and on the bleeding edge of this stuff. So we're hoping that some things that we talk about today are setting the tone policy-wise. But before we do that, how many people are AI data scientists in the room? Because if you are here, you're in probably the wrong room. We're going to start by I'm going to ask first Catherine and then Chris to kind of set some markers out there and define this. Because part of the challenge that we have is the definition of this. And it's going so quickly and so fast that if you're a civilian, i.e. a non-data scientist or non-technology person, it's just too difficult to absorb. So having set that table, let me get to Catherine first. I mean, to a layperson, to your relatives, at the dinner table, how do you explain this stuff?
So you're talking to the right person because I'm not the data scientist when these two actually understand the tech.
But you work at Google.
So it had to be described to me this way, and this is why I understand it now. If I were to say the dog chased the cat up the blank, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Tree, exactly. There's maybe two of you in here who would have said chimney. What AI does, large language models, what we're talking about most often now, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Bard, Gemini, that sort of thing, is basically a prediction model that identifies what's most likely to be said or seen or heard next. What's the most common answer available on the big internet of the world. So it's not pulling things out of its own hat. It's not thinking about what it could be or what it should be or what it feels like it should be. It's literally picking the most common denominator and filling in that blank of tree. So if you were to go into ChatGPT or Bard or Gemini, our product that we're really proud of, it would say a whole bunch of things. But honestly, it'll give a really interesting essay about US history based on everything that's been said in US history about this certain topic, having reviewed the internet and online. So that's the layperson's version of it's doing A plus B equals C. Some people might say D. Here's why. Here's why we don't think it's right. That's the basic level. So when you see it creating images or something like that, it says, okay, show me a picture of an astronaut in space. It will reference every single historical image of an astronaut in space, put some other qualifiers on it, and then show you an interesting picture, basically, of that same category.
Okay.
pretty good.
But in a technical way.
Or maybe not an interesting picture, but a picture nonetheless. Chris, can you just expand on that?
Yeah, so AI's objective is to mimic cognitive capabilities of humans.
That's it.
That's basically what it is. Machine learning is looking at code, kind of large language models, and actually coming up with a reason to give you an answer that you're looking for. And then computer vision is not looking necessarily at documents or at links on the World Wide Web. It's actually looking at images and trying to reason what's within the image to give you a predictive answer or pattern recognition. More of a technical
See, he's the
method
tech guy.
on it.
Well, can you do me a favor before I hop over to our elected official? Explain what a large language model is, i.e. ChatGPT. I mean, really what it is.
You'd probably be better at it, but the gist of it is a large language model is actually taking in a lot of pre-trained data and then a lot of fine-tuned data, and it's actually giving you a response based on a query or a question you present to it. So there's a bunch of different platforms, Google, ChatGPT, Copilot, but it's a great use case for summarizing House bills or any other type of contract. You want to get a quick overview of what happened in the contract without reading 200 pages. You can use a lot of searches out of large language models.
Representative Taglioni, how do you explain it to your citizenry, to your lay people?
Sure.
Like this.
Well, first of all, the definitions matter, right? So as we start working on legislation, the definitions are going to decide what is and isn't regulated, right? So how we explain it to constituents would be different than maybe how we would have to in law. For a lot of folks, what they see every day is how it's able to help their lives, right? And how it can mimic human behavior. And I like to tell people that you're using it already today, right? If you're on Google Maps, you've been using artificial intelligence for a long time. If you have HVAC control systems in your house, Google Nest, if I could keep promoting the company next to me.
Hey man, we're not that big.
You're not
We got
that
other
big.
companies.
Okay, other companies, all right. Ring. Do you own Ring too?
Yeah,
No,
Ring.
all right. But whatever it is, people are using it already every day in their lives. And companies, just like companies that are here today, are using it now. It is a tool, just like a lot of other tools, but it's a very powerful tool. And it's a tool that's so powerful and becoming so powerful every day that it is time for, I think, for states and for the government to start looking at this tool and seeing how it is being used and what the risks are in using the tool.
You got it. I mean, like one of the questions is it a card trick? You know, going and generating pictures of cats with astronaut faces and kind of weird things like that. I mean, those are card tricks. They're neat. But how many people here have used any of the Zoom, Team, Meet capabilities with AI? Has anybody used this? AI Companion, okay, one or two, or I think that's Zoom, Microsoft Copilot. So if you haven't used it, or Google Meet for the Google side of the house, turn that on. Because for those that don't know, what it does is it generates an automatic, like not transcript, but an automatic compendium of everything you talked about, your meeting notes with key takeaways. And the first time I saw that about 90 days ago, it blew my mind. Like, so if you're doing any type of work where you have to have meeting notes at the end of it, that is a drudgery activity. But once you see it the first time, so that is a capability that you can turn on with a switch that most people who have the paid versions of those get for free. So that's the other thing is it's not data scientists, it's data science, it's stuff that's embedded in products. So I had a quick question for any of the members here. Cognitive versus generative, they sound a lot alike, but does anyone want to take a whack at what the definitions of those are and how we should be, what we should be worried about? Generative versus like creating the next cat picture versus cognitive. I'll go to Chris as the data scientist.
This is like trying to explain the IRS tax code
Okay.
in some instances. So generative AI, it's literally a means of gathering so much information at once. We use it in our realm of solid waste management. We're actually detecting what's in a human's hand, and we're determining if it goes recycle, compost, or landfill. And we're doing that in real-time motion. So we're continuously capturing a lot of images and aggregating all that data in a way to leverage that data across all the stakeholders. So for the generative AI side, the cognitive generative, to me, it's still kind of difficult to bounce between the two. And I'm in the industry because you get different responses from experts within the industry. So that would be my stab at
Okay.
it. But it's something we deal specifically in computer vision and machine learning, and I kind of try to stay out of that side of it.
Yeah, I would just say generative generates, cognitive thinks, and I think right now cognitive is more still the promise side, hopefully.
Yep. And machine learning's doing the thinking and the interpretations and such, based on that data it's received and such from the training. So,
Okay.
but yeah, you have a great quick summary for it.
What's that? Yeah,
You have
I
a
mean,
quick-
they just sound alike. So I've heard people use them synonymously when they're actually not synonymous. I mean, cognitive AI does not exist right now. It just is that a true statement?
I don't even know.
Okay. Okay.
Well, what I would say,
I mean, like Skynet is not aware.
But what I would
Right.
say is, as we have these conversations, and I think for a lot of people, the first time they really work with a really powerful large language model, it is hard to distinguish
That's
for a lot
right.
of people
That's
between. I mean, when I ask people, I ask them all the time. Okay, when you start talking to ChatGPT, do you say please? Do you say thank you? Do you say I'm sorry? Most people do, right? Or at least I do.
I do too.
And it's because you're starting to think of it as acting in a way that is human-like, right? It's starting to answer questions in a way that you think is creative or innovative or beyond logic. It's reasoning. And so people can definitely come to that conclusion. I think the risk is then we start to maybe trust the outputs of these autonomous decision systems in a way that we would trust another human being more than we would just a simple machine.
I mean, what websites use chatbots? Almost all of them.
All of them.
Yeah. So from the Google's perspective, are you getting questions about this all the time? And what kind of the top questions are you getting from lawmakers or officials? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and if we're going to go into pivot towards the regulatory,
Yeah.
I'm going to get to that. I think there is a lot of curiosity, a lot of mistrust, a lot of natural skepticism, but there's also a lot of excitement from the business community, the government communities that can see huge efficiencies gained. So the way I think of it is AI is a tool. It helps you operate and make products or produce a product faster, more efficiently. So if you were to think of back in the day, fax machines, not that far back in the day. Fax machines or paper mail used to be the way that businesses would be able to translate or speak to each other. When it transferred to email, think about how much time we gained and how much more business was able to be done internationally on just real-time scale. You can think about that same concept now with government agencies. So Secretary Nelson spoke to us this morning. She said that there's 12.5 million pieces of paper that are processed through the Secretaries of State's office each year, which is unheard of. Think about the people, the poor caseworkers that are sitting there opening all those envelopes, scanning it, processing it, and getting it out the door. if you think about government efficiencies with a product that is able to input and scan and interpret certain words, identify commonalities, and then draft a response that a human sends out, there's incredible efficiency on government. I will say from the Google perspective, as we get into regulation, we recognize that it is a powerful and incredible tool that is not new, like Chairman Capriglione mentioned, but what's important is that we're hitting a phase where there is wider general public interaction with the product. ChatGPT, OpenAI, all of these other groups, Gemini, are giving people exposure in a way that they hadn't necessarily realized before. Yes, it was in Google Maps. Yes, it's in Google Search with suggested search terms, that sort of thing. We've been in a self-regulatory environment where we have established AI principles 10 years ago that we have been running on in a basic factor. But as it becomes more and more engaged in communities, in critical infrastructure, let's say, or elections or international politics, there is an inherent potential risk level that we're working and call to people that understand consumer protections better than we ever could. They're recognizing that if there's a material risk to healthcare or finance or critical infrastructure or something like that, there is a necessary safeguard that the government has traditionally put in, and we're happy to work with them doing, to build consumer trust and hold our companies accountable. But while we're doing it, it's not just our companies, it's all the bad guys that don't put it into effect their own AI principles.
Yeah, and they're not restrained by our laws and all that, right? But
Exactly.
So the question I have for our elected official on the stage is like, what reasonably should we expect from our houses of government, the state governments at least in the short term? I mean, given the learning curve, like what do you expect, them to address? Is it from the privacy standpoint? Is it from data usage? What problem is to be solved here?
Right, and I will say it's difficult. One of the things that we did early on was, and I'm talking a year and a half ago now, was to start looking at creating this AI advisory council, for instance, right? Because we knew that we were going to need a head start, at least before the next session. Here in Texas, of course, we only meet every 2 years. So honestly, I think we have one bite of the apple for this time, right? Hopefully we'll be able to set up something that there'll be some opportunities for maybe agencies to create some regulations in the meantime. But as a lawmaker, we are preparing for January through March of next year, or May of next year. And so we have a process that we've been talking about. We send out an RFI, right? We've asked the business community and other public stakeholders, hey, tell us what you're thinking. Tell us the models you think are relevant. Tell us about the things you don't think we should be involved in. We're going to have our first public meeting in May related to those types of business. And my goal is to have stakeholder meetings all around, because we're going to have to work together in a way to come up with, at a minimum, the guardrails that my constituents will require. And I'm talking about some of the scary things, like you mentioned, elections, right? We're going to have to work things related to election. We're going to have to work on super high risk situations, right? There's going to be a lot of conversations on licensing, right? Should you be able to go online and get a medical diagnosis, right, without a doctor or with AI? I mean, those are kind of things that are in a way happening today, but I think we're going to have to set some guidelines on those top topics for sure.
Okay, let me ask that question a different way.
That was my standard.
That was a good one.
You have to give it to the guy who's head of Lyceum. He's going to go for the...
No, I would ask this. I mean, given all the competing public policy priorities, how does it get on the governor's, lieutenant governor's, or speaker's radar screen in the next session?
Well, one of the things that we do is, and we have done, is we've created this IT caucus, right? Yeah. We've really developed it with your help and other people's help here in the room. And the goal of that is to, first of all, get as many House members and Senate members as possible. It's the largest, by the way, a plug for us. It's the largest bipartisan caucus. It's the second biggest caucus. It's the only bicameral caucus. So we're trying to get members from all sides and in all facets to be members of this. So that we can help educate our members. So we're taking tours, we're giving them as much info as we can about artificial intelligence, but also about the importance of regulating it as well. We're helping with talking points. So one is education and outreach to the other lawmakers that can help us. But I also think that it's going to require everybody in this room and other people to be able to go and say, all right, listen, this is a real issue. our advisory council, our AI advisory council, which is more focused on government efforts, we're planning on meeting at least once a month, all the way until session. It's meeting in the Capitol, it's public, we're gonna have public testimony. So I think all of this conversation and this buzz will help eventually get signatures on a document.
So you said once a month.
Oh, once every month, or
Okay.
I don't know.
To give you some sense, I think Google changed the name Bard to Gemini, what was that, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago?
Gemini was launched last fall, but
okay.
1.5 was about
Okay.
a month ago, yeah.
Microsoft Copilot was released, I just looked up the date, February 7th. Like, it's going so fast.
Yeah.
How
Right.
do you, with the learning curve component, where most legislators and staff don't understand this, and it's going so fast, how do you catch up and keep,
Well, I mean, it's not going to be easy. I mean, I can tell you that we got in, and it's no problem, and we'll figure it out. What I would say is what we're trying to do is get as much input as we can, real time. And, I mean, listen, when we had our advisory council, it was interesting. We had 4 different state agencies come in, right? And there's definitely a couple that are way ahead of all the other agencies, right? They're already using it. They've already got programs. I expect as part of the budget process through the LARs, a lot of agencies are going to do pilots and other things so that they're going to start working on it. But there's one agency in particular, TRS, that's like, hey, we were able to do stuff before this AI thing. We're still going to be able to do stuff without it, right? So I think it's okay to do as much as we can and then pause and see what does happen, right?
Okay.
We do that with our budget too, right? I mean, people
Same
always get
thing.
worried
That's
about, hey, you come up with a budget every 2 years. I mean, there are emergencies that happen, and so we have escape valves that let us deal with that as well.
If I can jump in from the industry perspective,
Yeah.
I think that
Let me
Chris
get-
probably has some thoughts here too.
Yeah,
Is
let
that
me
okay?
go to Chris too.
Okay, yeah.
So, Chris, I mean, thoughts about what our elected officials should be paying attention to and what they should not jump towards?
Yeah, I think it's going to be all about what data is used to train the models that
Yeah.
you're going to use to make decisions. That's the crucial point, because we can all lean one way or another on ways and ideas, right? So that model, that data needs to be governed quite tightly from my perspective, because it's going to generate the result you're looking for, and it needs to be bipartisan, it needs to be based on commerce from my perspective, and that's the pre-trained data and the fine-tuned data. That's what it's
So
focused
Chris, let me ask a follow-up question. Are your clients or organizations in general aware of the data that they're sharing with vendors?
No.
Okay, explain that for a second so everybody understands that.
I mean, well, anytime you're on Google or Bing or anything, right, anything you're doing is being captured and logged, and it's creating a profile of you and what you are interested in and where you are in these sorts of things. In our world of computer vision, we're doing the same thing at type of waste that's at a particular venue, and we're guiding people to do certain things, right? So just being able to, the data integrity, the data ownership, authorship, the data security, of course. I mean, these are going to be the critical things that establish a nucleus of support and growth for the AI
I mean, is it
model.
safe to say that all vendors that delve in this world are using data to populate their models?
Absolutely.
And if so, are they doing it with explicit approval?
Well, anytime you walk
Yes.
into
Yes, yeah, that's the okay. Company's not named Google, but I mean that's how they're. I mean, when you talk about large language models, like language models become better when they have more data,
Sure.
right?
That's
Okay.
the goal.
Yeah.
The more you feed it, the smarter it gets.
That's correct.
Yeah. So, but yeah, anytime you walk in an airport, you've given consent to be videoed, right? Same at a stadium. Hop on a browser, you've given consent to have activities logged and such through cookies and a variety of other techniques. So yes, I'd say they've given consent to search and such.
So he literally wrote the law on this, but
Oh, well, there we go.
literally wrote the book. But from our perspective, Google has public products and we also have private products. So those are two very different conversations. If you're just logging in on Google search, then that's going to be a public search that will be used to populate our Gemini products and everything else. If you're a state agency or a government agency or a private business, you would have an enterprise model that uses and touches only your data. We don't own it, we don't see it, we don't get the insights to it unless you need help with it. So it's very different category. If you have a private contract with a company, then they have agreed within their contract to share certain information. That's very different than populating, like, I want a cat picture on the moon. So if you're preparing like veterans benefits within the Workforce Commission, it's going to reference and read and recommend only thing based on the documents that you have put in the your own system. That's their data, not ours.
And I'll also say, I mean, to a large extent, because of work we had done on privacy or things that we had done on cybersecurity, there are currently laws on the books that can handle a lot of the questions people will have, whether it's on data retention or whether it's on making sure that the data is secure, making sure that the government has appropriate data rules in place. I think there's all, I mean, so I will say we don't have to rewrite everything in order to be able to
That's a fair
just
point.
to do
I
it.
mean, that's the other thing that I think annoys a lot of vendors is the fact that you think that before AI there was nothing. Of course there's a lot, like
In
this
some
is
cases, it might just be comma and AI, right? I mean,
yeah. Or another version of that is when you hear AI, just think automation on steroids. That's okay. Let's switch gears a little bit because we only have 3 more hours left. I made you look at your watches. I want to switch to workforce. I mean, I mentioned learning curve, and as we've all experienced, those that are in the business have a learning curve. And I'll tell you one story, and then I'll get to you, Chris. I've been in the business for 25 years, maybe more. I was at a security conference called Black Hat last year, and I sat around with a bunch of people that were similarly disposed, gray hair, gray beards, gray hair, all that. And almost to a person, they said, "This is the biggest thing since the internet, period, comma, and I'm trying to figure it out, get my head wrapped around it." And these are technologists that are hardcore network security, data security, application security people. What can we expect of the business leaders and workforce if technologists are trying to learn this? So Chris, why don't you get started on that end, on the learning curve?
Yeah, it's challenging just because the varying degrees of skill sets, right, and where you've been exposed to throughout your entire life. But I'll say, from what we're doing in a small little niche of solid waste management, what we're actually helping large companies understand how much material is being thrown away and diverted. Yeah, by partnering like with companies with Coke and such. So it's kind of one of those. I don't see a quick pathway personally from what I'm seeing over on our side of how that gap's going to be converged. Now, through the education topics there in the quality education afterwards, I think there's a pathway. But, in our sector, small little niche sector, it's quite challenging.
Okay. Anything from a Google standpoint?
So from the workforce talent chain development specifically?
Yeah, in general,
Yeah.
yes.
So I think that's one reason that we're really excited to see what's happening in Texas. And we've spent a lot of time hearing from our education leaders, Representative Van Dever, Chairman Buckley. Texas passed HB 8, which codified, among other things, a path for middle skill or upper skilled short-term credentials, career credentials, credentials of value. Google happens to provide those because we see a long-term benefit in communities and populations across the world elevating their own skill set to tackle and learn these technologies. So I think Texas is already really at the forefront of this conversation on developing a skilled workforce in a way that no other state has, taking it at a lens of what skills are necessary to fill these highly skilled jobs. I will say this is a long lens, though. This is not this year. Why we're talking about it now is to build the infrastructure so that as small in pieces or questions come up, we, on a corporate level, have some stability in understanding what the basic ground rules are. But then on the public sector level is what's going to continue in rulemaking for the next 50 years. Yeah. It's like Texas and oil and gas. We figured out a way, we created the model for oil and gas to thrive and build our economy, also maintaining consumer safety at the same time.
I'm going to follow up with you, Representative Capriglione. I want to throw something out, though, before on Google. One of the things that is we realize in industry is going so fast that curricula is having a difficult time keeping up. So some of the best content out there is given out by the vendors right now, Google specifically. Google and some of the other ones we won't name. But it's quite good because what they're all trying to do right now is have you orbit their large language model. And they want you to be, either of the Meta or the, OpenAI or Google, which is great. So the content that's out there, if you're motivated enough, given out by the big vendors, is actually quite good and it's up to date. They're not going to put anything out there that's not up to date. So most of the people in IT that have learned it, that are not pure data scientists, have learned it by self-doing, honestly, in the last 18 months. So from a workforce state standpoint, what can we possibly do? What can we do based on the earlier sessions to have that workforce of the future?
Sure. I think if you ask most companies today, or really anyone, they'll say there's a lack of qualified people to fill any job right now in the U.S. You can talk about teachers, you can talk about programmers, you can talk about whoever. And so, and a lot of that has to just do with demographics, right? I mean, we have gone through the baby boomer generation that's now starting to retire. You have more teenagers maybe going to school than ever before. And so you're just going to see an overall decline. But in the short term, there are things that we continue to do here in Texas, right? We work together to do a budget rider to go and help teachers get certified so they could go working with industry so they could get certified and then impart some of that knowledge on to K through 12 folks. We worked on an apprenticeship program so we could speed the amount of time that someone would be able to start working in IT for the state or from other groups. So there's a lot of things that we're doing. So I think in the short term, we're going to face a little bit of a challenge as we just lack the bodies to do it. In the long run, like Keen said, we're all dead anyway, right? So we're going to have to...
I promised we weren't going to take it dark. I mean, like, I promised.
So, I mean, but, I mean, there's a hope here, right? Because if you go and you look, I mean, the ultimate net prediction is that AI, with its productivity, will help fill the gaps for those jobs that are either going to be lost or that we just won't be able to fill, right? I mean, that's, if you just look at the graphs, we were in the 50% full employment, up to hit about high 60s, and now we're going back down. So we're going to need productivity tools to be able to do the jobs that we can't fill any other way. And we see those productivity gains in a lot of places. We talked about, hey, during, for instance, our AI council, TxDOT came in and started talking about something that was so boring but so important, which is they're dealing with invoices. And it used to take 3 weeks for them to pay invoices and to receive invoices and process it. It's completely manual. And they've taken it from 3 weeks to like 23 seconds, okay? That frees up time for other people to do things or to find something else. Now, of course, for those people that were doing that, is going to be more challenging, but we're going to do that. The second thing I'd say, in general, too, is there's two types of skills we need here, right? There are people that are going to be needed to develop these tools, and that's going to be super critical as we compete with other countries. And that's why I'm so glad so many of these companies have decided to move here in Texas, and maybe even more specifically here in Austin, because we're finally getting, listen, I used to live in Silicon Valley, and I moved here. And I never thought Texas was going to be as ahead of other states as it is today on technology. We have some of the biggest companies with their programmers and their developers right here in Texas. But the good news, too, is if AI is done right, you don't need to know how to program it, right? I don't know how Word is configured, but I can use it, right? So,
absolutely. That's a great point. And I want to bring up a point that you and I made last week at a Texas 2036 panel that we were on the similar topic, which was what is the most likely gain that you can get with AI? It's the uninteresting, mundane, repeatable, and probably unsexy bill reconciliation, all these different things. That's what, from a CEO standpoint, you should look for. It's not you're not going to become a data scientist. You don't have to. But what are the things that are, of course, repeatable? Okay, we've got some time left. Let's go dystopian for a sec. I promised we wouldn't. No. But so Skynet aside, and all the different things all the press that's out there. What are some of the risks what are some of the things we should generally be worried about, given the new nature of AI? And I'll start with Chris and work our way back here. What should the citizenry, what should the civilians worry about with AI?
I think the biggest one to me is the data that's used to train the model, if it's biased. That's so important because that kind of forms your perspective as a human, right? Just as you cognitively think through life. The ownership of the data, the disputes that might exist, like through intellectual property and such, that might be scraped through AI, through a co-pilot or whoever else to pull in that insight to somebody designing new technology. And then, of course, just the nature of the world we lived in with state-sponsored activity and stuff. There's.
Oh, we'll go there.
Yeah,
I promise you, we'll go there.
That's the one I really don't. That's not exciting at all to really envision. But long story short, the data that's used to train, I think, is the foundation of the results you're going to get.
You mentioned something, I just want to repeat it. New York Times versus OpenAI, suing OpenAI and Sam Altman because of accusing they scrape their data to populate their large language model.
Right.
So you're starting to see litigation along those lines. Google's perspective.
I was going to go adversarial nation
Oh, boy.
states.
Okay, that's the last part. Please.
I mean, that's the first part, last part, the middle part, the biggest concern risk as an American company that operates and works with American governments. We obviously participated a lot in national security conversations, and we have access to some of the things that come across for misinformation campaigns targeting critical infrastructure. That is a very significant risk. There are some nations that have a very vested interest in a global war on AI, so that they can get access to us. So I think we're very hopeful and confident in the regulatory guidance of
We can name names,
greater
can't
minds.
we? Are we allowed to, right? China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, in that order, more or less. I can't, you can't, I can.
We do put out, it's called a threat analysis group. We have a tag
That's it.
group
They-
that does red teaming and has all of the, you don't want to check our monthly reports, but they are publicly available if you'd like to see the list of cyber attacks on the US every month.
So these are
You're next.
I know, happy things.
All right, but first I'll move a little away from Google while I talk about I mean, there's a lot of potential risks, right? And you can read any sci-fi book. But for me, what I worry about the most is the effect that artificial intelligence and the algorithms that are used have on human behavior, right? So we'll just take news and information, right? At any given point, there's just so much content, whether it's news or videos or whatever it is, that is just being generated every single second, and we all use our phones primarily to go and access that information. And so the window that you have to all of that content is filtered in some ways. And it's filtered, and I would say manipulated, of course, just because of the way that it gets to you. And so we, as humans, spend a lot of our time learning as is taught to us from these algorithms. And I think there's a sincere and severe risk to us if we don't have, at least the government doesn't have some ability to at least recognize and let the citizenry know that that news and that information may or may not be accurate, it may or may not be directed, it may or may not be tailored for us. And I think that's a real risk if the things that you see every day and the decisions and the thoughts that you form every day are based on the content that is presented to you by algorithms.
Hence TikTok, right? I mean, so was 2020 the last actual election in U.S. history?
Is that one for me? I mean,
It got real quiet.
I just had one.
You just had nation state threats. We went there. No, I mean, like in all seriousness, and I'll tell a great story. I love this story. It's a security story. Instagram. One of the things you can tell on Instagram is geolocation. If you can suppress that, but a lot of people don't do it. So there was a bunch of Occupy Santa Barbara, Occupy Austin, all these back in the Black Lives Matter thing, all these Occupy sites that came up. They all came up about the same time, and the guys in St. Petersburg, Russia, didn't suppress the geolocation data. So there are bad actors out there that are trying to manipulate our system. I mean, okay, let me ask this question a different way.
Please.
What would you what would you advise our citizenry in the run-up to the election in 2024? How could a good voter be a better voter and be a little bit more resilient to this?
There's no voters in here. That's good. So, I mean, it's a trust but verify situation. Yeah. And I think, even in this last election, right? I mean, we're all subject to believing whatever shows up, right? But what I have seen, unfortunately, is us as humans in total are more willing to just believe what we see all the time. And we can say that we don't. We can say that we look at all these different news sources, but we really don't, right? I'll just give a really quick story about it. This has nothing to do with AI, but you can see how it can be manipulated by AI. So this isn't this election, but a previous election, somebody in Houston decided to do a slate card, right? So it's a magazine, full color slate magazine that goes and is sent to all the voters in my county, okay? I opened it up. I had nothing to do with it. I looked at it, and they had recommended me, which was good, right?
That's good.
But I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know anything. So most of what I do when I campaign is I go to people's doors, right? So I have this new part of my district, so I'm knocking on people's doors, and I go to this lady's house. I'm with my wife. And I'm talking to her, I'm like, hey, I'm your state rep, I love your vote, here I am, I've walked all the way to your house, I'm here to answer any questions. And she's like, are you in that magazine? I'm like, yeah. She's like, well, then you're good. Okay. I don't even know where that magazine came from, and she is. And so what I see in general, and that we all have to be cognizant of, is to do our due diligence, to do our research, to look at multiple sources, just like we always should have.
You know what the number one defense for phishing attacks is? Is skepticism. If it doesn't look normal or looks weird, don't click on it. Don't be that. Okay, so go ahead.
On elections, quickly, this is a self-governance thing that we actually implemented because of elections risk. If somebody, and for those campaign consultants in the room, sorry, we did it anyways, protecting consumers from falsified images or documents or advertising. A lot of people buy Google Ads during their election campaigns. We mandated a disclosure, not just a watermark, a verbal disclosure on any purchase campaign ad that runs on Google platforms. Must say generated by artificial intelligence or some sort of thing like that to help cut out some of that.
Okay. Let's see. Chris, any thoughts in this realm?
I think your point, due diligence, it's all about due diligence, being able to understand where the data is coming from, where you're getting your information, and exactly how to be a human and make a good decision for all of us, I think is the key, because it's just so much information, so fast.
So fast. I'm going to go a little bit off script here, and we're going to wrap up at the end, but I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions. I see the shock and awe look out here, so I thought it'd be good to open it up for one or two questions while you've got this group. Yes, sir.
State Department funded it, came out, that got a lot of media attention.
Yes.
For those that didn't hear, there was a report that came out from the State Department looking at, well, I'll let you guys define the headline, but it's pretty interesting, sensationalistic.
So you want to? I'll set it up. Okay, it came out, and there's lots of versions of this, including the statement out there that was it 50% of AI scientists think there's a 10% chance that if AI is unregulated, will result in extinction. Human extinction. So there's that out there. State Department report was of the similar vein. That's when we talk about generative, not such a big thought. The idea of cognition and cognitive and thinking is what worries everybody. We've not come across that threshold yet. And when we do, the analogy that they use is, in an arms race, nuclear weapons couldn't create other nuclear weapons. In AI, they could do things that are like to say, don't listen to that person anymore. Don't take that. That could be one thing that they come up with. Do you guys get that at all? Do you get that from lawmakers, from citizens? And how do you respond?
Well, I think 10% is low.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is, if you look at, for instance, how it's set up, one of the first viruses was a worm a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
And
the Morris worm.
Right.
The Morris worm.
The Morris worm goes, and because of essentially a typo,
Yep.
right, it ends up starting to infect at a faster rate than it should have. And so in self-contained artificial intelligence is fine, right? And so let's say I go and I use it to create a computer program, right? So I want it to write a little Python code for me. I can go and I can say, this is on ChatGPT, write me some code in Python. And I can get it, and I can copy it, and I can run it in my own computer, and I can say, okay, that's fine. Or now you can have it run in its own image, right, in its own self-contained container somewhere, and it goes and it runs it and makes sure it's okay. But at some point, clearly, what if that worm had the ability to not just have an accident inside it, but mutate and actually have an agenda and so on? So there are risks, and we do have to regulate it. But just like we had at one point done the Manhattan Project, right, and we all decided as a society that it would be really, really terrible if this was to go uncontrolled and that any nation state would get it. We all got together, just like we are now, having stakeholder meetings, having conversations with other countries, with state departments, and we set some rules, some code of ethics to prevent that from happening.
Right. One more question? We have a second brave man, or somebody heading out to the bathroom. Either one. Yeah, that's it. Okay. All right, there's Kelly. You got one.
Thanks. Could you speak a little bit more? I mean, we know that a lot of the jobs we talked about, sort of the redundant types of roles, are, potentially going to become a lot more efficient, and there may be some jobs that are effective that are going away, but for many other jobs, it's just going to be a tool that they use. Catherine, I know Google is working in this space, thinking about reskilling and upskilling for our workforce that is affected by this. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we offer short-term career credentials in 5 different topics: project management, data analytics, user experience design, designing websites, cybersecurity, and maybe an AI one coming up. Yep. One of our chief engineers, when he started to introduce or talk about Gemini, said that the language of the future is no longer coding, the language of the future is English. Because, see?
You had to think
it makes
about
you
that
think
one.
a little
That was
bit.
good.
It makes
That
you
was
think a little bit.
With a twang, a Texas twang.
Yeah.
I would throw out
So
there.
I think coding-specific data analytics, that will definitely fall to the wayside because a computer can do it much faster and more accurately than any human can. There are also data processing, like paralegals, that could be impacted. So what we talk about of this concept is what layers on top of the AI that does those jobs, that can review the data. So if you're going to have a coding background, yes, you're going to need to understand it, but probably add in project management so that you can cater the code on direction on which way to go, or more efficiently create language definitions that can summarize effectively or ineffectively. But I will say the Supreme Court came out with this last fall. There is no substitute for a human in any of this.
Yeah.
A paralegal can be, a tech can basically write a legal summary or a bill summary, but it's not going to have the institutional knowledge that a human does for context. So there are definite and distinct flaws. So anything that is very data heavy, digital, can be reviewed, summarized, processed, capture an image and distribute something. Mm-hmm. Those are things that I would consider adding on a project management or an English or a philosophy so that you can make sure to understand how to cater how to basically correct the tech when it does dumb things.
In the software realm, it's 75% of the development effort is documentation for a pull request. So like, what do software developers don't like to do? It's called documentation. So if you can automate that via AI, and so software developers are writing code and building logic or in English or not English or whatever, but like they hate documentation. So if you can figure out that's mundane, uninteresting, repeatable, okay, that's what you can do. Okay, so we're running out of time here. Let's, no more questions. Let's just do a wrap-up statement, if you don't mind, Chris. We'll work our way back this way.
I'd say a good way to deploy AI is anything that's data intensive, but also a customer pain point. So if you have a customer pain point, focus on that, how you might be able to leverage AI to solve the problem.
I'd say AI is not new, and it's not going to be a short-term conversation. We're talking about it for the next 30, 40 years, and we've been talking about it for 10. We are interested in building an infrastructure that we can deploy and maintain consumer responsibility while maintaining our ability to innovate and thrive.
And for us, I would say that as we continue to work towards writing some rules or regulations or laws on this, we look forward to your input. This is fast-moving, fast-changing, so we need as much information as possible. But the ultimate goal is to create some guardrails and make sure that Texas stays the #1 leader in innovation and technology, especially in artificial intelligence.
All right, I like that.
That's awesome goal.
You can tell he's done this a couple of times,
Yes.
right? It's really good. I'll just put it this way. AI is not going to put certain people out of business. People with AI are going to put other people without AI out of business, I suspect, and competition-wise. So that's what I'd say on that. Not totally dark note, but mixed note. And with that, let's thank this panel. Great job, everybody. We learned a ton. Thank you.